right. Okay. I'm just admitting some folks. Everyone's joining in the waiting room, and we are going to get started momentarily. All right. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to South Queens Women's March's Safety Planning for the Holidays panel discussion. So, I'm Aminta Kilawan-Narine. I am the founder and executive director of South Queens Women's March. A little bit about who we are. So, we are an intersectional, multiracial platform that was founded literally right before the pandemic. And it was our vision to host a physical march in the heart of our community to celebrate the resilience of women, girls, and gender nonconforming people in the South Queens area. The pandemic happened and stopped us in our tracks, and we had to shift gears, like many people did. We had to shift gears and figure out what we were going to be doing. We originally thought we were going to be connecting our community to resources, that we were going to be connectors. And many of us came to the table as advocates and activists, including my fellow board member, Tannuja Rozario, who will be co-moderating the panel with me tonight. We ended up becoming providers of those resources as opposed to connectors. And we had to shift. We are an all volunteer team led by community for community. And we've been doing so many different things over the course of the year that we've existed, including hosting pop-up pantries to provide food and essentials for our community, such as period supplies. We've been trying to also keep our community safe and well. And what that means is also being safe and well in your relationships, and including the ones at home. We've hosted workshops on at least a monthly basis on how to have healthy relationships, knowing that toxic relationships can absolutely fester during a time when we are sheltering in place. We've had conversations about um, creating safe spaces for safe sex. We've been having conversations about creating healthy boundaries, including with family members, how to foster self-love at this time, and so much more. We've also been integrating the arts into our work, offering free workshops on how to integrate movement and dance into your life. Things like Bhangra, Bollywood, soca, yoga, and meditation, things that are inherent to what it means to be part of South Queens, with the ultimate goal always being collective liberation for everyone in our community. And tonight, we're offering this workshop on safety planning during the holidays. So I'm not going to get into too much about the workshop itself because I will let my co-moderator tonight, Tannuja Rozario, tell you what exactly it is that we thought, why we thought this information was important to you. But I will say that we are recording this session for the benefit of our community members. And throughout, if you have any questions whatsoever, please use the chat function. So the chat function in Zoom should be familiar to you. You can just click on chat at the bottom of your screen and type in your question. And if you have a question for a specific panelist throughout, you can say that you have a question for that particular panelist. If you feel more comfortable privately messaging either Tannuja or I, you can do that as well. Your identity will be protected. We will not be saying your name. We will just ask the question for everyone's information on this panel. And with that, I want to say this is a safe and loving space. We're here for you all. We want to create this platform so that our community has the resources to get through the pandemic safely, and also to have the holidays be happy, and to ensure that we are planning ahead for anything that may come to be. Without further ado, I'm going to pass this over now to my fellow co-moderator, my friend, my sister, and board member of South Queens Women's March, Tannuja Rozario.
Thank you so much, sis. And I'm so happy that we're all here in this space together today. And we have a group of amazing panelists who are here today to talk about safety planning for the holidays. And we know that there's a strong relationship between intimate partner violence and the holidays. And we also know that this can be a very stressful and overwhelming time. And making a safety plan can be very challenging as we're juggling our own experiences, finances, and all other circumstances that may come with the holidays. And even during this time, it may be very hard for us to even support survivors. We may not even know how to support them during this time. So we wanted to provide this panel to talk about ways we can implement a safety plan to get through the holidays, how to maintain those healthy boundaries, especially we're still in the midst of the pandemic as well, on top of the holidays, and how to really support the people around us. So once again, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat, private message me or Aminta, and then we'll just get started with our discussion today. So our first question for our group of amazing panelists, actually, Aminta, do you want to introduce them first? Okay, cool.
So I'll introduce our amazing panelists, all whom I've had the pleasure of working with at some point in my life, and who we thought at South Queens Women's March would really be leading voices in this conversation. So Susan Jacob is the executive director of the Queens Family Justice Center, QFJC. She's a key ally and leader of our organization, South Queens Women's March. And the Queens Family Justice Center is a part of the Mayor's Office to End Gender and Domestic Violence. NGBV is how it is referred. They've been supportive of us since our inception, offering most recently art supplies for our Art as Healing paint night that we put on for survivors, socially distanced paint night. And they're a one-stop shop. Susan will talk more about the Queens Family Justice Center, but they're among one of 5 in the city of New York that provide a various array of resources for survivors. Christine Paramall, Esquire, an attorney, is the director of Safe Horizons Domestic Violence Project, and she oversees a program of attorneys and paralegals who focus on representing low-income domestic violence survivors or intimate partner violence survivors in all levels of the courts across the level of the 5 boroughs in New York City. She was a former prosecutor at the Administration for Children's Services, ACS, in Queens County, also former partner at a law firm, Paramall and Vaz PLLC, that focused on family and matrimonial law. She's a member of the Lawyers Committee Against Domestic Violence in New York and the South Asian Indo-Caribbean Bar Association, and she sits on the board of a very charitable organization called Saving Hands Emergency Aid, SHE. Tasnia Ahamed is a licensed social worker, and she received her master's in social work from Stony Brook University and has a specialty in trauma. She currently serves as a therapist at Khalil Center in New York and as the domestic violence program director at Turning Point for Women and Families. And Tasnia's career has largely focused on counseling female survivors of intimate partner violence and by addressing the safety, the social, and mental health needs of women facing violence in their homes. And what's important about Tasnia's approach is that she does this from a strength-based perspective and believes that healing begins with recognizing one's own self-worth. And so now I'm going to pass it again over to Tannuja, who will be asking some questions of our panelists to get this conversation started.
Thanks, sis. So aside from those amazing bios, we wanted to get a little bit more of a sense of what your everyday work is like in supporting survivors and preventing gender-based violence in your everyday work. So we want to get started by you telling us a little bit about that, and we can start off with anyone that would like to go first.
I'm happy to go first. So good evening, everyone. And thank you, Aminta and Tannuja, for hosting this really essential event this evening. As Aminta mentioned, my name is Tasnia Ahamed, and I am the Domestic Violence Program Director at Turning Point for Women and Families. Turning Point is the first community-based nonprofit organization to directly address domestic violence in New York City's Muslim community. And since 2004, when we were first founded, we've been providing a wide array of services to survivors, including individual counseling, support groups, crisis intervention, case management, advocacy, and referrals to needed resources in the community. And thankfully, even through this pandemic, we have been able to remain accessible virtually over the phone. We've, as many of you have here tonight, we have taken different measures and gotten creative to remain accessible in different ways. So thankfully, we've been able to continue providing services. Some of the languages that our team speaks include Bangla, Urdu, Hindi, Punjabi, and Turkish, and we're able to provide support services that way. And my role primarily is to oversee the direct services that we provide and to also support survivors on a daily basis in their unique needs and challenges.
I'm happy to go next. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you all tonight. I just want to thank first the Queens Women's March for the South Queens Women's March for having this event, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with the wonderful panelists as well. So I am the director of the Domestic Violence Law Project at Safe Horizon. For those of you who don't know about Safe Horizon was founded in 1978 as one of the largest victim services agency in the country. Specifically in my project, we serve survivors on a daily basis. So we assist survivors of intimate partner violence, low-income survivors. Usually our clients are 200% of the federal poverty guidelines, through a trauma-informed and culturally competent lens by offering free legal services, that's legal advice, consultations, and representation in Family, Supreme, and the integrated domestic violence parts throughout New York City. We handle cases involving orders of protection, child support, custody, divorce. During this pandemic, we've really been assisting the court in serving a lot of the residents throughout Queens in drafting orders of protection, through the FJCs, through the various court programs at Safe Horizon, really extending just our help to the various partner agencies that we work with. And that's pretty much what we do in a nutshell. I know later on we'll get into more of the services that Safe Horizon provides, but we are a small law project within Safe Horizon that provides legal help.
Okay, I'll go next. Okay, so my name is Cherie Lopez. I'm a domestic violence specialist at Sheltering Arms, Families with Children. I provide individual consultation sessions to 3 programs, and it's actually within the 3 programs is a total of 6 programs in all. So I provide sessions to CPP program, which is Child Parent Psychotherapy, and MST, which is multi-systematic treatment, and SBC, which is family support services, which is also another terminology for general preventive. So most of the therapists and the case planners send individual consultation referrals to me. Since I'm not doing DV groups, I'm doing just individual sessions. So they send a referral to me, I read it, and then reach out to the client and conduct an intake. And I do an individualized written personalized safety plan with them, and I conduct weekly sessions based on a workbook that was provided to me. So, and sometimes there's things that go on in the sessions that are not related to domestic violence that they have issues with. And if they don't get that information from their therapist or case planner, then I provide that information with them as a tool also. So just being a support to the domestic violence survivors is just ongoing safety planning. And then some of with the clients that I work with, they've returned with their abusive partner. So it's safety planning around that. Still meeting with them in a safe space. That way, no safety concerns arise. And that's basically it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. So at this moment, we're just going to open up responses from our 3 panelists, and then we'll save time at the end for folks to share their experiences or other questions that they may have. So thank you, Cherie, for sharing. And we'll save more time at the end for rest of the folks for our 3 panelists today, which are Christine, Suzanne, and Tasnia. Suzanne, would you?
Yes, of course. First of all, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with Aminta, Tannuja, and my fellow panelists, including Christine and Tasnia. So thank you so much for having us for this very important panel. The Family Justice Center, the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence. We develop policies and programs, provides training and prevention education, conducts research, evaluation, performs community outreach, and the office collaborates with city agencies and community stakeholders to ensure survivors of domestic violence, gender-based violence have access to services. So the mayor's office also oversees all the Family Justice Center located in all 5 boroughs. And I am the executive director of the Queens Family Justice Center. And as you can imagine, Queens Family Justice Center, it's so diverse, so wonderful. The borough of Queens, it's amazing. And Queens Family Justice Center, we have about 75% of our clients are foreign born, and we have 27 partner agencies. And of course, Safe Horizon is one of them, and it's so amazing. We have a lot of Safe Horizon staff, and they speak various different languages. We have various different agencies directly on site who speak not only different languages, but we also have access to interpretation services over 200 languages. And we're working remotely right now. We're available from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday to access take any phone calls from survivors of domestic and gender-based violence. And I know we're going to get into this a little bit later, but clients can get connected to organizations that provide case management, economic empowerment, counseling, civil legal assistance. And I'll talk a little bit later in terms of how to make these referrals. And of course, I just want to state as well, all are welcome regardless of language, income, gender identity, immigration services as well.
Thank you so much. You all are doing such an amazing job, and especially talking about that shift y'all had to do during the pandemic to even provide more support in different forms for folks during this time. So our next question is, we know that it may be difficult to maintain healthy boundaries during this time, especially in your household. And on top of that, we're in the midst of a pandemic. So how can we create those healthy boundaries during this time, and especially if kids are involved? And Christine, would you like to get us started on that question?
Sure. So many of us who have been interacting with survivors on a daily basis know that survivors have been living in close corners with their abusers for months now. Many of the clients that we have talked with over the past 9 months have decided to keep the status quo in many cases during the pandemic, and also extending into the holiday season, especially when there are children involved. Sometimes survivors express that this is their desire because they want to minimize disturbances in their children's lives, right? So when speaking about healthy boundaries, especially when children are involved, I think it's important to also talk about safety planning. We know that domestic violence has devastating effects on children, both physically and emotionally. We also know that children who have been exposed to domestic violence in their home are likely to carry this violence through in their own relationships as adults. So it's important to listen to how children are feeling during this time. Children have had to adjust a lot during this pandemic. If you find that they are struggling, you should try to seek services to help guide them through this time. I think children internalize a lot of things. And so I think it's important to recognize through, a parent has, it's an intuition. And so I think you have to pay attention to that. Part of safety planning during this time and setting boundaries is to know what may trigger an abuser, right? To make a plan to minimize any interactions that can result in an abuser becoming violent. I think it's important to also explore networks, support networks for clients. during this pandemic, we've had to become a little bit more creative in the way that we stay connected to one another. So I recommend using video chats, texting, email as a way to stay connected, of course, while still safety planning and using those mechanisms. I just want to mention at Safe Horizon, we have a safe chat feature on our website that allows you to chat with anyone, like an advocate, if you're unable to speak on the phone and if you do need to have a safety plan in place. I think as hard as it may be for our clients when children are involved right now, this time is really, really difficult for everyone. I think it's important to at least try to practice gratitude, to keep some positivity in the home. This may help with alleviating stress in the moment. It may keep survivors and children grounded during this challenging time.
Thank you.
Oh, I can go next if you would like. Okay. So we know that especially children, I mean, we have a children's program and it is very difficult right now. Children in particular, they feel responsible for the abuse, constant anxiety, ambivalence. Children may love and hate the abuser at the same time. There is confusing feelings, worrying about the future, stress, insomnia, asthma, eating disorders, anxiety, all these the children, especially that we work with right now, experience this, and some sort of way to help these children, support them during this time is to let children know that the violence is not their fault, acknowledging the violence with simple facts, trying not to assign blame on everyone, the other person, help to assure children that all feelings are okay, trying to help them identify and talk about their feelings, let children know that it is okay to love all family members, and of course, give children the opportunity to ask questions, especially right now. I think everyone is feeling the stressors right now. And, as Christine said, in terms of self-care, be a role model, take breaks, get plenty of sleep, exercise, eat well, connect with friends and family. But I know it is very difficult, especially if you're in a home in an abusive situation. Other items are, of course, spending time with your child in activities, reading together, exercising, playing board games. And this is all, as I mentioned, it's very difficult right now. And we're going to be giving our resources later with regard to New York City Well, which also provides mental health counseling confidential. And we can provide that information later.
Mm-hmm. I think what Susan and Christine mentioned are excellent points. And just to build on that further, I think creating boundaries calls for first reflecting on what are the areas where we need to create boundaries, what are the areas that make our clients feel triggered, what are situations that they recognize to potentially escalate into something more serious, right? I think we all as providers, we understand that our clients are, the experts in their own lives or the experts in their own situation. So to encourage them to reflect on, okay, when do you start feeling nervous perhaps, or when do you start feeling scared? When do you start recognizing that maybe there's something's irritating their partner, right? And so if helping them plan how to address that situation from the get-go, right, I think can be really helpful. So if that means potentially, when they start feeling anxious, maybe moving to a different room, maybe gathering the kids, stepping outside for a little while, go check out the lights in your neighborhood now that the holidays are coming up, right? Having a plan on how to kind of reposition oneself when they recognize that a situation is triggering is one way to set boundaries, and I think can be helpful during this time.
Thank you so much. I think that's so important, especially the idea of you mentioning like reflecting, and even Christine, you mentioned listening to our children, knowing when they are triggered as well, and just being, more reflective of the situations that we're in order to know when to step out, like you said, Tasnia. So, and even that feeling of isolation during this time, especially during the holidays, can be very difficult. So having that idea of being on the video chat, texting, can be really helpful. during this time as well. So our next question is regarding the stressors that we may be feeling during the holidays, which includes finances. So for many of us, money may be tight. There's anxiety that can produce stress for both the parents and children during this time, during the holidays. So what advice do you have for families to navigate stressors together as a unit? And what are some tips or techniques? I know we already talked about some of those tips and techniques for us to implement and create that less anxiety-driven holiday. Anyone can get us started. Do you want to get us started, Tasnia?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So yeah, I think we've all been seeing the impact, the financial impact and stress that's come up because of this pandemic. And while I'm sure the suggestions we make today won't solve all of those problems, I'm sure everyone can offer some helpful suggestions. And one thing that I've noticed and have been very grateful for throughout this pandemic is that the community has very much stepped up to provide support. So folks like South Queens Women's March, folks like the different mutual aid groups that have popped up throughout this pandemic have been trying to provide support by offering financial assistance, food assistance, and gifts during the holidays. I'm seeing organizations offer gifts to children during the holidays. So to really, if finances are tight, to really reach out to and find those community supports that could help alleviate some of that stress. They're out there, they exist, and to seek them out. I think that could be one way. And also, I think just getting creative with the way families are spending time together, right? During the holidays, there's a lot of gift sharing, getting creative even with that. So maybe thinking of activities that can be done as a family, right? Maybe cooking meals together, getting engaged in some crafts projects together, right? This can all function as ways to celebrate and be together, and hopefully not create financial stressors during this time. Right.
Thank you, Christine. Would you like to go next?
Sure. I'd like to, echo also everything that Tasnia mentioned. It's so great to see a lot of community-based organizations offering assistance, especially in the holiday season, offering gifts, running drives like the South Queens Women's March organization. I see that you all are doing so many great things that will help families through this holiday season. The triggers and the stressors rather, these have been stressors for the last 9 months, right? And like I said, they've rolled into the holiday season. I think first I would say, don't place too much emphasis on expectations, traditions, the pressure of buying gifts, or celebrating with certain family and friends. We know that this holiday season is going to look different. We may have to forego many of the things we did in prior years, and that's okay. With children, when they're involved, I would say create a plan and other things to look forward to in the coming months past the holiday season, so that you place less emphasis on old traditions and things you can't do because of the pandemic. This may alleviate some of the stress in the household and disappointment that the children may experience because of, lack of that family tradition that they once had and that they miss. If you decide to also spend the holidays around certain family and friends, I would just make sure that you're mindful of who you're spending the holidays with, right? This is a very tense time. And so sometimes you have those individuals in your family. Sometimes you have friends who could just maybe arouse an abuser a little bit more, likely creating a dangerous situation for you when you're alone. So I would just say be mindful of who you're spending the holidays with again. And like Tasnia said earlier, we always tell survivors that they're experts in their own situations. That's something we always tell them. They know the abuser the best, right? And it kind of goes back to safety planning again. You have to create a number of safety plans, especially during the holidays, in anticipation of being in different households, right? Around different family and friends. So there may be many safety plans that you have to create during this season. And also just make sure that survivors are connected to mental health services if they need it, and they're compliant during this time.
I just want to echo what my fellow panelists mentioned, Tasnia and Christine, with regard to community support. We realize that collaboration is key, especially during this time when resources are so limited and we all need the community and working together. So just in terms of self-care and so forth, we talked about this, especially during this stressful period, but practicing in a self-care in a way that works for you. Focus on being gentle with yourself. When social distancing, create a safe space for social support and reach out to friends online if possible. I think my panelists talked about this as well, identifying potential triggers that place you and can feel safe if an argument happens. If unable to stay home with children, find a caregiver you trust. I know that we're going to be getting this, talking a little bit more about safety planning in a little bit, but creating an exit plan with an advocate or someone you trust in case you need to leave an emergency. And also New York City Well is also connection to free confidential mental health support. And anyone can speak to counselors via phone, text, or chat and get access to mental health and substance abuse services. And interpreters, again, are available for over 200 languages, and translation is available.
Thank you all so much. And I just want to echo this idea that community is everything right now. That's why we're even having this panel right now. We're all getting together in this space and having this conversation together from different organizations, right? And just coming together and just having a conversation we don't really have that often of how can we safety plan. And I love some of the ideas that you gave, such as, you know, creating different ideas to help those financial situations, like making the gifts, making food instead, and not having that emphasis on tradition, and really providing that inspiration for our kids to look forward to other things. And this is going to be different. We're in a pandemic. It's during the holidays. Things are going to be different this year. So I really like that emphasis of not making sure that, you know, this is tradition. So I'll turn it over to Aminta to ask the next question.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Tannuja just said. You know, I think during this time, it's important maybe to create new traditions, and that might not be easy, but it's important to think out of the box and be creative. And this is a very difficult conversation that we're having, but it is the reality for so many people in our community. And I think so far, I mean, I've been getting some private messages in the chat about how useful the information you three are providing to us tonight is. And I also want to shout out that there's so many service providers and staff who have joined from various nonprofit organizations to get the support that they need to help the clients that they're interfacing with throughout the pandemic. And they've expressed that this information is very useful. So I wanted to share that with you all. So the next, and speaking of service providers and creating exit plans with advocates, the next question relates to how we support survivors at this time. So although, you know, the statistics are kind of shaky on this, we do know that there is potentially a correlation between intimate partner violence and the holiday season for various reasons, including the fact that there are more gatherings and more financial stressors and all of the things that come with the holidays, good and bad. So as nonprofit organizations and as service providers on this call, we are often interfacing with survivors in the work that we do. And it would be helpful for us to sort of get a sense of what we should be expressing to people who are confiding in us that they're experiencing gender-based violence, that they're experiencing domestic violence, but they simply cannot leave their situation for all of the reasons that have become even further exacerbated by the pandemic. So if you all could just help us to get some tools on what we can say to that survivor who is struggling with domestic violence or gender-based violence and simply cannot leave. And I'll call on you all in this order. So we'll start with Tasnia, then we will move to Christine, and then finally we will end with Susan on this question. So over to Tasnia.
Sure. I think that what I've noticed has been really key throughout this pandemic and now during the holiday season as well, is to remind survivors that the support does exist and is still accessible, because many people have been making the assumption that, okay, well, everything has shut down, and so no one's available to help me right now, but that has been far from this case currently. And so to remind them that, yes, services are accessible. It may not be the same phone numbers or the same mechanisms that were used before the shutdown, but many organizations have put together chat lines, text lines, have extended hours for their helplines, and have created virtual programming. And so reminding them, well, here are the different ways you do have access to support. And like I've mentioned earlier at Turning Point, we were always meeting clients in person, and during the last 8-9 months, we have transitioned to virtual platforms, but our support group is still available, is still active. Our counseling services are still active. We have a helpline where survivors can now text to and text questions and ask for support in that way as well. And I know many other agencies have done the same. So really spreading that message of accessibility as widely as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Tasnia, for sharing all that you did. I'm going to turn it now over to Christine.
Yeah, and just like Tasnia said, I think it's important to remind survivors that help still exists. While we're in a pandemic, it's going to be different, right? There's nothing that can replace that sitting across from someone and that human interaction, but there's still help that exists from all the legal service providers that we're going to talk about today and other providers. We are working remotely, but we're still here if you need us. I think it's also important to discuss when we talk about this question is that as service providers, we need to view every interaction with a survivor. And this can't, I know I said this before, but I guess it can't be stated enough, through a trauma-informed and culturally sensitive lens. I think we work with survivors from all ethnic backgrounds. We're in New York City. It's important to realize and keep in mind the economic and sociocultural factors that come with each client, right? And so some individuals that we speak to on a daily basis may not even identify what they're experiencing as domestic violence, because this is a social norm. They may be from a culture where violence has become a normal way of resolving conflict. We see this a lot. I see this personally a lot in the Indo-Caribbean community. So it's important to not be judgmental. You need to establish that trust with the survivor, and that's sometimes very difficult, and we see that as service providers. So you need to remain in a judgment-free zone when speaking with a survivor. Remaining in that judgment-free zone, but also being cognizant of red flags. Even if you've identified those red flags, you still have to kind of approach the situation in a way that you're not saying to a survivor, well, I've heard all of this, but I don't understand why you're still in that situation. Why didn't you leave? You know you have other options. That's not so easy. A survivor has opened up to you, and that's difficult to do. So we have to be mindful of what we say in certain situations. And I think finally, once a survivor has made the decision to tell somebody about the abuse, it can become very dangerous for that person. So we need to ensure that we're taking the precautions to keep that survivor safe and being a constant support system.
Yeah, absolutely, Christine. Susan?
Sure. Some of the tips are is recognizing early warning signs and risk factors, which could be potentially dangerous, such as batterers' violence has escalated in frequency and or severity. There's separation anxiety, estrangement. We know that danger occurs when there's separation in the home, engages in stalking, monitoring behaviors, has threatened to kill the survivor, there's strangulation, access to guns, extremely controlling. There's other different factors in terms of signs. And so some of the things that my fellow panelists have also mentioned is when supporting these survivors, we really practice client-centered trauma-informed practice at the Queens Family Justice Center, because we understand the complexities of domestic violence. So when supporting supporting survivors, some other tips are what not to say, right? Avoid victim blaming. Why did you leave? Why did you call the police? Be non-judgmental, be an active listener, ask open-ended questions, focus on feelings and use positive self-talk, give survivors control over how much of their experience they want to share. So those are a couple of different tips for when supporting survivors of domestic violence.
Yeah, thank you, Susan, for sharing all the risk factors. And in line with everything, and those were very, very on point and useful, I think, for everyone on our call tonight. In line with that, another question that has come up in the chat is, what are some signs that we could be on the lookout for that are indicators of domestic violence, of intimate partner violence, especially if we're going to be supporting community members, supporting family members and friends throughout this period? I think it'd be useful to have a sense of what we should be looking out for. So if any of you three would like to chime in on this point.
Sure. So, when we talk about domestic violence, right, what is that at the root of it all, right? What is that exactly? And we understand that domestic violence is about power and control, right? And so where one partner is exercising different tactics, different behaviors, activities in order to maintain power and control over another partner. And so I think questions to reflect on when working with clients, when working with survivors is, does the client feel comfortable in expressing themselves? Do they feel like they're able to freely disagree about something or express themselves in an open way? Do they feel like they're able to go out and have other relationships, other connections in an open way? Again, do they feel comfortable? Do they feel comfortable spending their own money, or is there someone who's dictating how they do that, right? So it really comes down to how much control does a client feel they have over their own surroundings, over their own life and their own activities, and how much control does someone else maybe exercise in their life instead, right? I think that's what it really boils down to.
Yeah, thank you so much for offering those up. I think those are definitely things that we can look out for, very tangible. So thank you. Christine, Susan, do you have anything to add on this point?
I think that was so well put, Tasnia. I think, you really have to look at the root of it, and you explained it so well. I think some other red flags that I would just mention, especially like during the holiday season, when you may have a survivor and opposing party in the same room, you could notice that the opposing party may be a little bit possessive or very possessive. They may put down the other party, the survivor, often. You also get a lot from the body language that you can see that a survivor exhibits when they're around another party that may be unusual, and you can pick this up. Sometimes it might be subtle and sometimes not so much. And also rigid gender roles, right? So I think those are very important things to also look out for.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think a lot of this can be seen even without having to have a conversation with someone, right? So I think what all that you mentioned also is really critical to us being able to identify who may be experiencing violence. Susan, do you have anything else to add on this point?
I think they said it very well. I think isolation is one of the hardest things for survivors of domestic violence, especially if they're not allowing them to speak to family members, friends. They're completely isolated. And also, I mentioned earlier in terms of signs to look out for with child witnesses of domestic violence, oftentimes we hear this a lot where, my child didn't hear anything and so forth. And we know, I just had a niece recently and she's so smart. And, we know that children hear everything and they're so smart and so forth. So many children feel anxiety. They may exhibit violent behaviors and so forth, things that they're learning at home and so forth. So I think, many times we can learn a lot from the children and see signs of potentially that they're witnessing domestic violence at home. So those are a couple of different additional items.
Yeah, those are all really, really critical, and we're definitely taking notes. A lot of this information is what we want to follow up with everyone on this call to make sure that we can provide this to our wider community. So these are all really, really tangible ways that we can support at this time. I'm just really grateful for your insight. Now we have another question regarding, so obviously each of you are providers in your own way, and have access to resources that we want to be able to share with our community and with anybody who's on this call right now. So what are some of the resources that you can share as it pertains to individuals who are experiencing intimate partner violence, or any of the stressors that we talked about during this call, as it pertains to the holidays, as it pertains to this time of year, as it pertains to the pandemic and how things have shifted as far as resources, and what are the resources that your respective workplaces offer, whether that be legal, whether that be mental health, whatever it may be. What are some things that you would recommend and you would refer to those who are on this call and to community at this time? And we'll go in this order. We'll start with Susan, followed by Christine, followed by Tasnia.
Great. So some of the services at the Queens Family Justice Center, especially during this time, we know that many people don't have access to computer or are not comfortable using the computers. So we have something called Computer Time Program, and basically we work on a variety of issues, including applying for public benefits, access HRA, apartment searching, job training, and so forth. We also have something called Cornell Tech, especially during this period. We work with clients who have safety and privacy of their digital service. So we hear this a lot from many survivors who are like, I don't know, but my abusive partner knows everywhere where I am. I can't quite figure this out. And oftentimes Cornell Tech can work with them around digital privacy and understand security of their devices and check if there's actual spyware installed on their devices. And of course, we offer civil legal assistance, help for orders of protection. We have a fantastic 18B program where they're able to work remotely with the client and attain family court order of protection. We of course custody, visitation, child support, divorce, housing, and immigration. So we can provide civil legal consults for all of these things. And we also have can connect. We also have law enforcement. If a survivor does want to report an incident and so forth, they can utilize one of our NYPD officers. We work with the New York City Sheriff's Office and the District Attorney's Office. We also have mental health and counseling to support emotional well-being for a survivor and their children. And I just want to say, certainly, last but not least, there is help, and we are here to listen, and no one is alone. Again, at the Family Justice Center, we practice client-centered practice, and we know that many people don't want to move forward. They want someone to listen. And the Family Justice Center, we can provide that services along with a lot of the partner agencies that are also on site as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susan, for offering up all of that. That's a lot. And it's all being run through the Queens Family Justice Center. We included the link earlier in the chat, and we'll post it again. But even things like Access HRA, which is a platform that helps to support clients to get that little extra help, whether it's cash assistance or food stamps, SNAP, as the case may be, is useful, especially at this time. And so often our community members they don't know that it exists. They don't know that these, or there's a certain shame or pride associated with not wanting to apply. And so much of this is also destigmatizing all of the things that can be accessed. And that's where, again, the synergy of government and community is so critical. And just thank you for everything that the Queens Family Justice Center does. So now I had said the next person would be Christine.
Yes, and I love the family justice centers, especially Queens. They provide such valuable assistance to survivors. It's great. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Safe Horizon provides. We have many resources to support survivors who need assistance. We operate a 24-hour hotline. It's really easy to remember. It's 1-800-621-HOPE, but we'll give you the resources later on. Our hotline advocates are able to safety plan, provide information, connect survivors to programs and services, even help with crisis counseling and helping to find shelter placement. And what's important about that is they also assist in every language. So there's no barriers there. We also have counseling services. So my colleagues at Safe Horizon provide a full array of clinic services remotely via telehealth. They can provide it in person if an appointment is made and if it's really needed. We also have a street work project, drop-in locations throughout the city, which helps homeless young people, helps them with legal assistance, mental health services, obtaining public benefits, emergency shelter. And then we have our court programs who are also operating remotely, but our colleagues there have been very instrumental in helping people get orders of protection throughout New York City and all 5 boroughs throughout this pandemic especially. Of course, we have legal projects like the one I'm part of, the Domestic Violence Law Project. We have an immigration law project, and we have an anti-trafficking law project. And we also have a crime victim assistance program where we have advocates who sit in every precinct throughout New York City. And they provide assistance with so many different things. They contact victims once a police report is filed. They follow up with them. They identify safety concerns. They make home visits with NYPD. They are working remotely, but we have been connecting people with advocates throughout this pandemic. I feel like I've only touched the surface or scratched the surface on services that Safe Horizon provides. So we'll provide the website. I think it was already provided. But like Susan said, just realize that this is an incredibly difficult time. And we are here, my colleagues, everyone on this panel, everyone at Safe Horizon is here to provide the best support possible.
Thank you so much, Christine, for that. And you mentioned homelessness, and obviously, given the pandemic, the repercussions that we're experiencing with the pandemic, we are seeing a rise in homelessness in the city, and that includes among youth, which you also talked about. And I'll say that even with the LGBT community, homelessness is also on the rise. It can be a very difficult time, a very ostracizing time for members of the LGBT community. And oftentimes domestic violence and intimate partner violence is a direct feeder into the shelter system in New York City. So how can we intervene earlier on to ensure that that's not the case? It takes hard work and it takes continuous effort. But thank you for all that Safe Horizon does across so many different levels to support community. Finally, Tasnia, if you can share anything that Turning Point offers as far as resources or that you may know of that would be useful for our community members tonight.
Sure. I mean, I first want to say that, both my co-panelists, your organizations are amazing, and all of the work that you guys do, the programs you offer, many of our clients have benefited from many of those programs. So thank you for all the work that both of you are doing and that your teams are doing. At Turning Point, as I mentioned before, we offer individual counseling and safety planning for survivors of domestic violence. We are open to any female identifying survivor, regardless of their backgrounds. We have an understanding and expertise in the Muslim community, but our doors are open. Our virtual doors are open to everyone. And so please do reach out. I believe my colleague actually just put in our helpline in the chat, so you guys can take a look at the chat for that. In addition to that, we do offer a virtual support group that meets on Zoom every Mondays from 12 to 2. And that's where survivors come together. It's a really beautiful space. They're able to ask questions, they're able to share experiences, share advice, and guide each other through different challenges that they're facing. And so it's a space where we're able to really nurture support and safety and sisterhood. It's our sister circle. It meets every Monday. In addition to that, we have a vibrant youth program where we offer leadership workshops to young Muslim girls. We have a weekly youth group that meets on Friday afternoons on Zoom, which has been really, really valuable even through this pandemic, because it's been a space where young women can come together and talk about different things, how they're coping with the pandemic, how they're coping with the holiday season, and how different it is. Recently, we had a workshop on eating disorders, because that was something that the girls were very curious about and wanted to learn more. And sometimes we have game night. So it's a space to build that social support and connection. Under our youth program, we also offer anti-bullying, anti-hate workshops for youth across the city from all backgrounds. And so that too has been available virtually. And we talk about the effects of bullying, what that looks like, how to be a peer support and an upstander rather than an idle bystander. And so if that's something anyone's interested in, please do reach out, and we're happy to conduct those workshops in your spaces. And through our senior support program, we have continued our ESOL classes that are geared towards the US citizenship exam. That's been done over a conference line, which we were able to get our senior students to learn and to get onto. They were so eager to continue their classes from home. And so we've been able to continue that every Wednesday, all afternoon, every week. So those are some examples of some of the ways that we provide support. Our newest program that we've just launched, actually even in the midst of this pandemic, is our transitional housing program. And so we're able to offer short-term rental assistance to survivors who are in need of that support. And we're really excited to get that started as well.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Tasnia. So I have a couple questions. I have actually a few questions based on what you said, and also for our other panelists as well. So one, with regard to the short-term rental assistance, are there any specific criteria or eligibility requirements that need to be met to access? Is there like an application? How would someone be able to access that?
Sure. So the short-term rental assistance, it is specifically for survivors of domestic violence, for female survivors of domestic violence. There is an application process. And so if someone is interested in learning more, in applying, they can call our helpline, and we're happy to share that application with them and walk them through what that process looks like. The idea behind that is to, as many of us as providers, we understand that housing and the financial responsibility is one of the biggest barriers, and one of the biggest reasons why survivors feel pressured into staying in an abusive relationship, right? There are questions around, how am I going to support myself? How am I going to pay my rent? Where am I going to go? And so with that in mind, the transitional housing program is meant to alleviate that burden temporarily, so that it gives survivors an opportunity to seek employment, to go to job training, to go back to school if they need to, and gradually ease into that financial responsibility. And so that's the standpoint where we're coming from with that.
Understood. Thank you so much. That's just a good resource for us to be able to provide to community, because so many people are in need of that extra assistance right now. So thank you so much to Turning Point for offering it, and for the information you just provided. And so to all of our panelists, you talked about so many different resources. Just something that came up in the chat is, are there any restrictions? And I guess this is similar to the question I just asked Tasnia, but any restrictions as to who can access services? So you are all obviously, you serve survivors of gender-based violence. So, but beyond that, is there any immigration status that needs to be met, or at any income levels or anything like that? So everyone's shaking their head no. So just, okay, Christine has a point.
Yeah, so immigration status, no, we don't look at that. That's not something that comes up, but for our legal programs and some of our programs across the board, there is an income requirement. So for example, for legal assistance, you would have to be 200% of the federal poverty guidelines, right? So we service very low income individuals. And that's the only piece I wanted to just mention in there with income.
Got it. So it sounds like, otherwise, immigration status is not a barrier, and people should feel comfortable with that being the case, and accessing all of your services, and I think oftentimes it's just, these are questions that come up, and it's one of the reasons why people are reticent to get help. And so to the extent that we have this information, we can again be liaisons to work with each other. I don't believe there were any questions that came up in the chat, that I have, other questions that I have seen. If anybody at this point, it is 7 o'clock, if anybody in the chat who's on our call has any questions, you can post them in the chat at this point. Just want to make sure that we're taking into consideration anything that may have popped up. A lot of information has been shared tonight by our 3 amazing panelists, and just want to make sure that if you had any questions based on anything that they said, or based on your own specific experience, whether you are a survivor, a service provider, community member, now is the time. So please feel free to use the chat function, and we will be sure to ask your question. And I'll also say, one of the beautiful things about this pandemic, while we see if anyone has questions, is the ability to convene in this way. While it isn't the same as being in person, it is so amazing how much we have been able to utilize platforms like Zoom to bring resources to our community in a way that we otherwise would not have been able to. Like our organization, we don't have a brick and mortar space. And this has been an amazing way to reach community, especially, I mean, we talk about youth leadership. Tasnia mentioned the youth leadership program at Turning Point. A lot of young women in our community are not allowed to go out late at night. It's just the nature of a lot of our culture, and being able to provide platforms like this is further providing resources to women, girls, and gender nonconforming people in our community who otherwise would not have been able to access them. So for all of the difficulty and challenges that the pandemic has presented, there have been some blessings as well. So I don't see any.
Hello, everyone.
There we go.
So I have a quick question. My question is, what do you say to a survivor who is still with their abuser but constantly get triggered when, they experience certain things that reminds them of their experiences? Like, I know it's a very difficult question. I've been trying to get the answer to this one.
If I mean, I'm happy to address that, but and you mentioned the survivor is still with their abusive partner?
Yes,
Yeah.
And they're no longer being abused, but
Okay.
certain times they do get triggered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the trauma talking, right? That's when certain situations remind them of the abusive behavior. It sounds like that's when they feel worked up, right? And I think that starting with slowing down and recognizing, well, okay, what's happening in that moment, right? So is that individual experiencing shortness of breath? Are they sweating? Are they feeling like they can't focus, right? What's happening in that moment? And then helping come up with ways to stay grounded. So sometimes that means engaging in breathing exercise to help bring them back to the moment. Sometimes that means doing different grounding exercises to reposition themselves in their space. So naming different objects in the room. Sometimes that means actively telling themselves, you know what, I'm safe here. I'm with loved ones. I'm well right now, and actively saying that out loud. So different things work for different people. And I think it's important to try out different kinds of grounding techniques and see what's effective, and consistency is important.
Oh, thank you so much. That's definitely helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for that, Tasnia. I think a lot of us on this call could benefit from everything that you just said. So thank you. That was really helpful. And I say that like personally, that's really helpful.
Thank you.
If there's anyone else who has a question, you can feel free to use the chat, or as Afiza did, you can also unmute yourself and ask the question directly to the panelists if you feel comfortable. with that, I think that's an important, and I think that's a good way to end, just thinking about those grounding techniques, and I'm thinking about how we're gonna get through this really challenging time, which is an understatement. And you all have done such an amazing job of supporting us through this work. And I want to say thank you on behalf of the entire team at South Queens Women's March for all that you do on a daily basis, for partnering with us tonight and providing these resources to our community. To everyone who has joined tonight, thank you so much for taking the time, for choosing to be here, for whatever reason you decided to register for this workshop. We're just grateful that you're here, that you chose to be with us, and we hope that this was useful. We will absolutely be in touch with you all afterwards with a follow-up email. I know there have been many requests throughout this panel in the chat about providing resources that everyone mentioned. And so we will be sharing the recording of the session with everyone who registered so that you can look back. And if there was something that spoke to you, you can definitely find it in the recording. We'll also be sharing resources. And I just want to say thank you to Susan from the Queens Family Justice Center, to Tasnia from Turning Point for Women and Families, and to Christine from Safe Horizon for being with us, for being our partners, for being sisters in this movement. And just thank you. Thank you. I know this work is not easy, and we're just so grateful. Tannuja, do you have anything else to say before we close?
No, I think that was amazing. We're just so grateful for all the amazing work you all are doing, especially when we're dealing with so many difficult things right now. And we look forward to working with you all more and continuing this conversation.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much,
Getting
everyone.
lots of thanks in the chat.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Good night, everyone.
Good night.